Welcome to the Hindu Daily. We are diving straight into the editorial section today with a piece titled The Rot of Power, Decoding the Epstein Files. And reading through this deep dive, it is clear we have to look past the usual true crime angle here, right?
Yeah, exactly. The editorial really pushes us to see this not just as one man's, depravity. It exposes a whole globalized model of how business is done at that level. The sexual exploitation was, unfortunately, transactional.
Right, like a currency.
Exactly like a currency. Epstein didn't just run a trafficking ring, he ran a networking hub. He used this complicity to cement bonds between politicians, banks, and major corporations.
It's that concept of bonding through complicity. I mean, if everyone in the room has a dirty secret, everyone is safe because no one can talk.
Precisely. It entirely eliminates the risk of betrayal. You have former presidents, oligarchs, and West Asian sheiks all mingling in this highly compromised space. The article refers to this as the normalization of a corrupt bonding model. But what makes this specific editorial so critical for us to unpack is that it brings the focus right back to India.
Yeah, let's get into the India angle because we aren't talking about fringe figures here. The unsealed files point to Anil Ambani and the current union minister, Hardeep Puri. The details in these emails are, well, they are pretty startling.
They really are. If we look at the Ambani correspondence first, the files show Anil Ambani allegedly invoking the word leadership to get Epstein's assistance. And he wasn't asking for financial investment. He was asking for pure access.
Right. He wanted Epstein to set up meetings with Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and Steve Bannon. He literally wrote, "Leadership would like your help for me to meet Jared." That phrasing, leadership, is just so loaded.
It is incredibly heavy. The editorial rightly asks if he was authorized to speak for the government. Since when does a private businessman use a convicted sex offender? Because remember, Epstein was already a convicted felon by this point as a back-channel broker to the U.S. administration.
It really suggests a parallel foreign policy track being run by oligarchs rather than actual diplomats.
Yeah, and then you have Hardeep Puri. Now, this is a man who is a career diplomat, someone who knows protocol inside and out. But the emails from 2014 paint a very different picture.
It is the casualness that is so jarring to read. I mean, Puri writes to Epstein asking about his exotic island and says he would like to come across for a chat. But the line that really stands out is when he signs off saying, "Have fun. Not that you require encouragement from others for that."
Have fun. Knowing what we know now, and honestly knowing what was already widely rumored back in 2014, that is a chilling thing to put in writing to a known predator.
It really is. And the editorial takes strong exception to Puri's defense, right? Because in a press conference, he not only claimed ignorance, but seemed to almost trivialize the nature of Epstein's crimes.
He did. He noted that Epstein was convicted for soliciting a prostitute and a woman who was underage, phrasing it almost as if it were a minor indiscretion. The article argues that this dismissal, along with a broader silence from the Indian establishment, signifies that we have imported this rot.
We're normalizing the idea that powerful men can overlook literally anything if it serves a networking purpose.
Exactly. It's a sobering look at how the global elite protects its own, completely, regardless of borders. But speaking of global power dynamics, we should probably pivot to the second editorial piece.
Yeah, this one takes us into a very different kind of tension. We are looking at the Trump Doctrine and the Iranian nuclear crossroads. The premise here places us right in the geopolitical landscape of 2026, with Donald Trump back in the White House for a second term.
And according to the editorial's analysis, the situation in West Asia has severely spiraled. By this point in 2026, the U.S. and Israel have already bombed Iran's nuclear and air defense sites.
So the kinetic action, the actual war, has effectively started.
It has. But here is the twist, and the article points out this is classic Trump. After the bombing, Trump is now aggressively chasing a diplomatic deal. He wants his own version of the JCPOA, the very nuclear deal he tore up during his first term.
Wait, so he wants a consummated deal now, and he's threatening that if Iran doesn't agree, we will see. It just seems completely contradictory. I just bombed your infrastructure, now let's shake hands.
Well, the sources frame this as the Trump Doctrine. It is this strategy to escalate in order to de-escalate. He operates on the belief that maximum pressure, up to and including military strikes, forces the opponent to the table out of sheer desperation.
But the editorial points out a major difference this time around, which is Israel's role. Benjamin Netanyahu has apparently succeeded where he failed with Obama and Biden.
That's a crucial point. In the past, Netanyahu couldn't quite convince American presidents to actually pull the trigger on Iran. But with Trump back, the article notes that Netanyahu successfully used Israeli intelligence assessments to convince Trump that Iran was racing toward a nuclear bomb.
So he won the battle for Trump's ear, which led directly to the strikes. But now that the dust is settling, the neighbors must be absolutely terrified. The Arab states invested a massive amount of money in Trump, didn't they?
Billions. But they didn't invest in a regional war. The Gulf monarchies are incredibly anxious right now. They need stability for their own economic visions. And now, Iran is threatening retaliation against U.S. facilities located right in the Gulf.
So the very people who back Trump are now praying for his diplomatic pivot to succeed just to avoid a forever war right in their backyard.
Exactly. And then there are India's stakes in all this, which the editorial highlights. India is in a real bind. We rely heavily on Iran for connectivity.
Specifically the Chabahar port, right?
Right. That is our essential gateway to bypass Pakistan. We also need Iran's cooperation to manage the Taliban situation on their eastern border. And of course, there's the oil trade. If this conflict escalates further, oil prices will skyrocket and the Indian economy takes a massive hit.
So India is essentially watching this high-stakes poker game with missiles, just holding its breath. Let's step away from the battlefield and move over to the playing field. Our next piece is from the opinion section. It's titled, "The Pitch and the Pitcher, Indian Football versus Cricket."
Ah, the perennial debate. Why is a nation of 1.4 billion people so globally dominant at cricket, yet so, let's be honest, struggling at football?
The context for this conversation in the article is the recent crisis in the Indian Super League, the ISL, which actually faced a shutdown due to the lack of a commercial partner, and the stats they provide are just painful.
They really are. The national team is ranked 141st in the world, and failing to qualify for the 2027 AFC Asian Cup is a tough pill to swallow.
141st. That is abysmal. But the authors of this piece, Abhik Chatterjee and Yannick Kolako, point out what they call a fascinating fan-base paradox.
Right, because despite being ranked 141st, India actually has 305 million football fans. If you think about it, that is larger than the entire population of countries like Brazil. It is undeniably the #2 sport in the country.
So if you are listening to this and wondering, if we have the fans and we assume we have the talent somewhere in that massive population, what is the actual blockage? Is it just cricket sucking up all the oxygen and sponsorship money?
See, that is the common excuse, but these experts explicitly argue against it. They state clearly that cricket isn't blocking football. The core issue is a lack of international heroes.
That makes a lot of sense. Cricket has absolute demigods.
Exactly. You have Kohli, Dhoni, Tendulkar. A kid playing in a village sees them conquering the world and thinks, I want to be that. Football in India entirely lacks those international icons. We don't have an Indian player starting for a major Premier League club raising those aspirations.
You really can't be what you can't see. But didn't a lot of people think the ISL was going to be the fix for this?
The article calls that the silver bullet fallacy. There was this belief that if we just started a flashy league, brought in some money, suddenly we would be World Cup contenders. But you cannot run a marketing campaign to achieve sporting excellence.
It requires a much more boring, systemic approach.
Yes, a 5 to 10 year systemic plan focusing on grassroots, coaching, nutrition, and infrastructure. And a major takeaway from their conversation is that we have to stop this constant comparison to cricket.
Right. Stop looking at the BCCI's massive bank account and feeling jealous.
Exactly. The article suggests that India should be looking at Asian football peers, like Thailand or Australia. How did they structure their domestic leagues? How do they successfully export players to European leagues? That is the realistic benchmark.
If we want to move up from 141st, we need to stop looking at the cricket pitch and start looking at Asian football infrastructure. Let's move from the pitch to something a little more personal for all of us, our health. We have two back-to-back pieces from the science section today.
And the first one is actually quite optimistic. It's titled The Quiet Revolution in Pediatric Dentistry. It details a major paradigm shift in how the medical community treats kids' teeth.
For decades, the standard model was basically drill and fill. You wait until the kid is in visible pain, then you go in with the drill. It is traumatic, it is expensive, and I think everyone has a childhood horror story about that.
Oh, absolutely. But the article talks about moving that timeline way, way back. The new standard they are pushing for is a well-baby checkup for the mouth by age 1.
Age 1. That sounds incredibly early. Most kids barely have teeth then.
It does sound early, but the entire goal is to catch issues before they ever become cavities. But the real game changer mentioned in this piece is the shift toward low-tech solutions. Have you heard of SDF?
Silver diamine fluoride, right. The article mentions it. It acts kind of like a paint.
Yes, it is beautifully simple. A dentist or even a trained health worker just paints this liquid onto a cavity. The silver kills bacteria, and the fluoride hardens the tooth structure. There's no drilling, no local anesthesia injection, no tears.
But the article mentions there is one catch. It turns the cavity spot permanently black, so you have a black spot on your tooth. I can definitely see why some parents might hesitate for aesthetic reasons.
Sure, aesthetics are a factor, but think about the trade-off the article presents. If you are a rural family with zero access to a high-tech dental clinic, or if you just have a terrified toddler who absolutely will not open their mouth for a noisy drill, this is nothing short of a miracle.
It stops the pain immediately and saves the tooth. The article frames it as a crucial tool for medical accessibility, and it emphasizes that this isn't just about teeth in isolation. They use this great phrase, calling the mouth the front door to the body.
It is the perfect way to describe it. Chronic inflammation in the mouth, like gum disease or rotting teeth, is directly linked to all sorts of systemic issues later in life. We're talking heart disease, diabetes risk, and purely from an economic standpoint, prevention with a varnish or SDF is literally pennies compared to the thousands of dollars spent on surgical repair later.
There was also a very poignant line in the text about the shrinking world of a child in pain. When your teeth hurt, you can't eat properly, you can't focus in school, you don't even want to play. It physically and emotionally shrinks your life.
It really does. It restricts their entire development. And actually, that concept of unseen physiological damage links perfectly to our next science piece. It is about another biological necessity we constantly ignore, which is sleep. The article is called The Physiological Cost of Chronic Sleep Deprivation.
I won't lie, this one scared me a little. We all joke about being tired or drinking too much coffee after pulling an all-nighter, but this article frames sleep deprivation as actual biological toxicity.
It is literal toxicity. The most fascinating part of the deep dive explains the glymphatic system. Think of it as the brain's own dedicated dishwasher that only runs on the night shift.
The night shift mode of the brain. So how does that actually work?
When you enter deep sleep, specifically slow wave sleep, the physical spaces between your brain cells actually expand. They open up to allow cerebrospinal fluid to wash through and flush out metabolic toxins, specifically a protein called beta amyloid.
So if you don't sleep, the physical trash in your brain doesn't get taken out.
Exactly. The toxins just build up. And over time, that specific accumulation is heavily linked to neuroinflammation and Alzheimer's disease. But the article stresses it's not just the brain. The rest of the physical body goes into absolute hormonal chaos.
It mentions physical changes too, right? Like when you are sleep deprived, your pupils constrict, blood flow changes, and even that cerebrospinal fluid we talked about pulses differently.
Yes, the physical markers are measurable. And then there are the hunger hormones, which explains the late-night snacking cravings we all get.
Right, it's a double whammy. Ghrelin, which is the hormone that signals hunger, goes way up, while leptin, the hormone that tells your brain you are full, crashes.
So your body is basically screaming at you to eat, even if you objectively don't need the calories. At the exact same time, cortisol, your main stress hormone, stays constantly elevated. That puts a massive continuous strain on your heart and keeps your blood pressure up. Plus, your insulin sensitivity drops, increasing diabetes risk.
And the biggest myth of the article absolutely busts is the idea of catch-up sleep. If you were listening to this and thinking you can just sleep 10 hours on Saturday to make up for the week, the science says otherwise.
We all want to believe that works. But you can only cure the subjective feeling of fatigue. You cannot magically undo the metabolic damage or the cellular stress that occurred during the week. The biological debt has already been paid with inflammation. You simply can't get a refund on the weekend.
Well, that is definitely a wake-up call for our sleep habits. Let's shift gears entirely and move over to the text and context section. We are looking at a deeply technical but vital piece titled The Architecture and Evolution of the GPU.
This is crucial for anyone trying to understand the modern digital economy. Whether we realize it or not, our entire world, and especially the AI boom, runs on these specific chips, and the article does a fantastic job of explaining what a GPU actually is using a really helpful analogy.
Yes, the teacher analogy. I love this because it makes it so accessible. It compares a CPU, which is the main brain of your laptop, to a genius teacher.
Right. A CPU is like one singular genius, maybe an Einstein. He can solve any math problem you give him, no matter how complex it is. But he has to do them one at a time, sequentially. That is your CPU. A GPU, on the other hand, is like a room filled with 100 average elementary school teachers.
So none of them can solve advanced calculus.
Exactly. None of them can do the complex stuff alone.
Right.
But if you give them 100 simple addition problems, they can solve all of them simultaneously in the exact same time it takes the genius to do just one. That is parallel processing.
And the article notes that originally, This architecture was just designed for video games, right? Just to make the 3D pixels on our screens look pretty.
That was the original use case. To render a 3D image, you have to calculate the color, the light, and the position for millions of pixels on a screen, 60 times a second. It is not difficult math, but it is a massive, massive amount of repetitive math.
So the GPU pipeline was built specifically for that. The article briefly breaks it down as vertex processing to define the 3D geometry, then rasterization to turn those shapes into flat pixels, and finally shading to figure out the color and light.
Yes, and it was perfectly optimized for that parallelism. But here is the massive pivot the article explains. How did we go from rendering graphics in Call of Duty to training massive AI models like ChatGPT?
It turns out it's the exact same math.
It is mathematically identical.
Yeah.
The math required to calculate the shadow of a dragon in a video game is the exact same type of matrix operations, which is just multiplying huge grids of numbers used in a neural network. When AI researchers realized this, they didn't even need to invent new chips. They just bought the ones gamers were already using off the shelf.
And fast forward to today, we have absolute monsters like the NVIDIA H100. The sheer scale of these modern GPUs is mind-boggling. They have billions of transistors.
They are engineering marvels.
Yeah.
But the cost is energy. The article highlights a staggering statistic. Training a single large neural network can consume 6 kilowatt-hours a day per GPU unit.
Which they note is equivalent to running a home air conditioner for 4 to 6 hours, or leaving 60 LED bulbs on for 10 hours straight, just for one chip.
Now scale that up to massive data centers with tens of thousands of these chips running 247. The energy footprint is monumental.
And one company basically holds the keys to this entire kingdom, which is NVIDIA.
Their market dominance is unprecedented. They have about 90% of the PC GPU market, and they absolutely dominate the data center space. But the article points out something really insightful. Their real moat isn't just the physical hardware. It is their software ecosystem called CUDA.
Right, because millions of developers have spent years learning to code specifically for NVIDIA's CUDA platform. It creates a massive lock-in effect.
Exactly. Even if a rival company manages to manufacture a faster or more efficient chip, nobody wants to spend millions of dollars and years of time rewriting all their specialized software just to use it. It is the ultimate technological monopoly.
From the cold, hard logic of silicon, we are moving to a deeply emotional and sociological piece, also in the text and context section. It is titled The Broken Promise and the...
But incredibly necessary read. It centers around a specific incident, the murder of Renee Good. She was a white poet and a mother who was shot by a federal agent. The author utilizes this tragedy to explore the broader mechanics of dehumanization.
The article makes a very specific argument here. It argues that this incident proves the so-called protection that society promises to white womanhood is actually entirely conditional.
Conditional on serving the patriarchal structure, yes. The piece argues that the moment Renee Good was perceived as a threat, or simply when she was no longer compliant, that societal protection immediately evaporated. And the author connects this specific violence to a much broader systemic history of dehumanization.
They reference Representative Jamie Raskin's visit to an ICE facility to make this point.
Yes, Raskin noted how the system systematically strips non-white detainees of their dignity. It takes away their names, it removes their agency, turning them into numbers. The core argument here is that dignity is stripped long before any physical violence ever occurs. The physical violence is just the final, inevitable step of a bureaucratic process that starts with dehumanization.
To counter this grim reality, the article brings in the work of two profound cultural figures, Nina Simone and Toni Morrison. Let's unpack the Nina Simone reference first, which focuses on her song, Baltimore.
Usually when we think of Nina Simone in a political context, we think of her as the voice of righteous, explosive anger, like in her song, Mississippi Goddamn. But the author highlights Baltimore as a completely different kind of protest.
It was described as an act of attention, right?
An act of attention and an act of profound love. Despite the physical decay and the systemic hardship of the city described in the song, the act of singing about it is an admission of love. It is about looking directly at a place or a person that the state has entirely written off and saying, I see you. You are human and you matter.
And then the article discusses Toni Morrison, specifically her masterpiece, Beloved.
Yes, looking at the character of Seeth, Morrison's work, according to the article, serves as an archive of interiority. The state, and historically the slave owner, viewed the enslaved body merely as a tool for labor or as a physical threat. They reduced human beings to procedural units.
But Morrison writes Seethe as a woman with complex thoughts, deep desires, haunting memories, and trauma. By insisting on her rich interior life, Morrison actively counters the state's attempt to erase her humanity.
There was a line in the text that really encapsulates this. A body does not die procedurally.
That is such a haunting line. It really reminds you that when we read news reports about casualties in a war or victims of state violence, we aren't just counting bodies on a spreadsheet. We are talking about the extinguishing of entire worlds of memory and feeling.
It is a powerful plea for us to constantly resist the bureaucratic erasure of human life.
It's a heavy thought to hold on to, but an important one. We're going to pivot now to the business section, looking at how nations are actively positioning themselves in the shifting global economy. First up is Beijing's blueprint for a China-centric global trade order.
This is a fascinating strategic look at how China is operating right now. We discussed earlier how Donald Trump is returning to power, pushing heavy tariffs, and explicitly trying to decouple the U.S. economy from China. This article outlines China's strategic response to that, which they have termed anti-decoupling.
Anti-decoupling. It almost sounds like a paradox. The U.S. pushes them away, so China just decides to hug everyone else much tighter.
That is exactly the strategy. According to the article, this blueprint is based on over 2,000 internal trade strategy papers. The ultimate goal isn't to fight the U.S. tariffs head-on in a trade war. Instead, China is attempting to stitch itself so deeply into the fabric of the rest of the world, specifically the EU, the Gulf states, and the Global South, that these partners simply cannot afford to decouple.
They want to make themselves the indispensable heart of a brand new multilateral order. So what does this blueprint look like in practice? What are the specific moves they are making?
It's a massive flurry of diplomatic and economic activity. The article lists that they're working on 20 new trade deals with countries ranging from Canada to Honduras. They have unilaterally dropped tariffs to zero for 53 different African countries.
Wow, zero tariffs. That's a huge play for influence. The article also mentioned they are pitching AI-powered custom systems to their neighboring countries.
Yes, offering to build their digital trade infrastructure, which obviously binds those economies even closer to Beijing's tech ecosystem. And the piece notes a very interesting shift in their diplomatic tone, a reverse Mao shift, you could call it.
How so? Because a year or two ago, Chinese state propaganda felt very aggressive, very martial.
Exactly. It was all references to the Korean War and fighting Western imperialism. But now the tone has drastically shifted to presenting China as the calm defender of multilateralism. They are actively positioning themselves as the responsible adults in the global room, keeping free trade open while the U.S. retreats into protectionism.
But is this grand strategy actually working? Because the article suggests there is a pretty massive risk to this plan.
There's a massive flaw, and it stems from China's own domestic economy. Domestic consumer demand in China is currently very low. Chinese citizens simply aren't buying enough goods to sustain their manufacturing output. So China has to export its way out of economic trouble.
So they are taking all these excess goods like EVs, steel, and solar panels and just flooding the global markets with them.
Right. And while that keeps their factories open, it is starting to seriously worry their new trade partners, especially countries in the CPTPP. You can't just be a massive seller in the global economy. You have to be a buyer, too. If China keeps dumping artificially cheap goods, it destroys local industries in those partner countries. Even their new allies might start putting up protectionist walls if it continues.
Speaking of struggling domestic economies trying to find a way out, let's look at our second business piece. This one is titled Venezuela's Fractured Oil Rush, The Hard Road to Recovery.
This story is fundamentally a tragedy of neglected infrastructure. To set the scene, the U.S. under Trump has eased some of the crippling sanctions, theoretically allowing foreign companies to go back into Venezuela to pump oil and stabilize global prices. But the reality on the ground is just grim.
The article opens with this incredible, almost cinematic incident involving a drilling rig called the Alula.
The Alula, yes. This is a Chinese-operated drilling rig that finally arrived in Lake Maracaibo, which is the absolute heart of Venezuela's historic oil wealth, after waiting out years of sanctions. So it finally gets the green light, starts moving into position, and immediately crashes into a rusty, unmapped underwater pipeline,
causing a massive oil leak right off the bat. You really couldn't write a more perfect metaphor for the current state of their industry.
It perfectly symbolizes the rot. The article describes the underwater infrastructure of Lake Maracaibo as 20,000 kilometers of metallic spaghetti. It has been neglected and starved of capital for so long that it is literally rusting away into the water.
And yet, despite this environmental and logistical nightmare, major global players like Chevron and SLB Schlumberger are rushing back in.
They are desperately jostling for position. They are literally fighting over the few pieces of working equipment and rigs that are left in storage. But beyond the broken pipes, the article outlines a massive technical challenge regarding the oil itself.
Right, because Venezuela doesn't just have normal oil, it has extra heavy crude.
Yes, it is basically the consistency of thick tar. You cannot just pump that through a standard pipeline. In order to move it and export it, they need to mix it with diluents, specifically light crude oil.
So wait, they have to import oil just to be able to export their own oil?
Essentially, yes. Or they have to fiercely compete for the very few domestic light crude fields that are still operational. So Chevron isn't just fighting to pump the heavy oil. They're fighting a logistical war for access to the light crude, just to make the heavy stuff physically movable.
The article projects an expected increase of maybe 500,000 barrels per day, but it compares the scale of this repair and rebuilding job to post-war Iraq or Kuwait. That really gives you a sense of the devastation.
It is going to be a phenomenally slow, dirty, and expensive process. Calling it an oil rush makes it sound easy. It's more like trying to run an obstacle course in a junkyard.
Finally today, let's head over to the foreign section for a story that bridges cutting-edge technology and bold national ambition. We're looking at the rise of Unitree and China's robotics revolution.
If you happen to watch the Chinese New Year Gala recently, you absolutely couldn't miss this spectacle. They had an entire coordinated squad of humanoid robots developed by a company called Unitree, performing martial arts kung fu live on stage.
For an estimated audience of 500 million people, that is one way to do a product launch.
It was a massive statement of intent to the world. But for our listeners here in India, the name Unitree might ring a bell for a slightly more embarrassing reason. Do you remember the controversy recently with the robo-dog?
Oh, the Galgoshes University incident in Delhi? How could I forget?
It was wild. Galgoshes University proudly displayed this robotic dog, parading it around and claiming it was a major breakthrough in homegrown Indian innovation.
But then internet sleuths got a hold of the footage.
Exactly. Within hours, people online realized it was literally just a Unitree go-to robot dog. You could buy it online right now for about $1,600. They basically bought a commercial toy, slapped a local sticker on it, and claimed they invented it.
It's funny, but the article points out it also highlights a very serious technological gap. Unitree is mass-producing and selling these advanced robotics on the open market, while we are, in some cases, still pretending to invent them.
That is the sobering reality. The article dives into the founder of Unitree, a guy named Wang Jingxing. He's only 36 years old. He started building these cheap prototypes back in his university dorm room. And now his company is a major player in a country that currently holds 40% of the entire global robotics market.
40%. And the domestic market inside China is expected to more than double by 2028. This clearly isn't just a Silicon Valley-style startup success story. This is driven by heavy state policy, right?
Absolutely. The article notes that advanced robotics is a central pillar of China's 15th five-year plan, which covers 2026 to 2030. It describes the current domestic landscape as a bidding war environment. Local provincial governments are just throwing subsidies and infrastructure at robotics firms to help them scale.
Because they want to replicate their success in other hardware sectors.
Exactly. Just like they meticulously plan to dominate global solar panel production, and just like they're currently dominating electric vehicles, they are determined to dominate the hardware of the future, specifically humanoid robots. They see a fast-approaching future where the global workforce is supplemented by these machines, and Beijing wants to be the one manufacturing and selling them to the rest of the world.
From kung fu robots to geopolitical chess games, and from the rusting depths of Lake Maracaibo to the neural pathways of our own sleep-deprived brains, we have really covered a massive amount of ground today.
We certainly have. Digging into these sources is just a constant reminder of how deeply interconnected these global systems of power, biology, and technology really are.
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.